Go sit with the other wives, ma'am. The front is reserved, foundation principals, and their guests of honor only. You'll be more comfortable in back. They talk recipes, gardens, that sort of thing. You can share pie recipes." The words landed soft. That was the thing about them. Major Sean Braddock did not raise his voice, did not sneer, did not point. He smiled the practiced smile of a man who had run 40 of these evenings and knew exactly where every person in the room belonged. He set one hand at the small of the air beside her elbow, not touching, only steering, the way you steer a guest who has wandered a half step past the velvet. The ballroom behind him was gold and low-lit. 12 chandeliers. 200 chairs dressed in white. A dais at the far end with 3 folded flags and a wall of photographs that glowed under its own soft light. At the head table, 8 place cards waited in careful script for the principals of the Special Operations Foundation and their guests of honor. The room smelled of candle wax and cut flowers and the faint metal of a hotel kitchen working at capacity. The woman he was steering wore a plain slate gown. No jewelry, no clutch. A watch turned inward on the inside of her wrist, so the face lay against the pulse. She was perhaps 45, dark hair pulled back without a single strand loose, and she held herself with a stillness that did not belong to a room like this. She looked at Major Braddock for 1 second. 2. "Of course," she said. 1 word and a half. She turned for the back. Her name was Colonel Renata Hollis. In 11 days, she had led men through country that had no name on any map a civilian would ever see. In 3 days, she would take command of a task force whose existence was a secret to most of the people in this ballroom. Tonight, she had flown 1,000 miles, put on the only gown she owned, and come to stand for 1 minute in front of one photograph on that glowing wall. She moved the way water finds the low ground, without argument, without waste, already knowing the shape of the room. She did not look like she was counting. She was counting. 2 service doors on the left, 1 on the right, propped, a busser's shoulder against it. The dais, 4 steps up. The head table with its empty chair at the center, and no card in front of it yet. She logged the exits the way other people logged the centerpiece, and her face gave away exactly nothing. By the bar, a man in army dress blues went rigid. Command Sergeant Major Frank Delgado was 51 years old and had a glass of ginger ale halfway to his mouth when he caught her profile across the moving crowd. He did not finish the motion. He set the glass down on the bar without looking at it. His eyes did not leave her. He knew that walk. He had followed that walk across a riverbed in the dark once, 14 years ago, when following it was the only reason he was alive to stand in a ballroom now. He knew the woman in the slate gown, and he knew that if he called her name across this room, she would never forgive him for it. So he said nothing. He only watched, and his jaw set, and something old and hard moved behind his face. Colonel Hollis reached the table Major Braddock had waved her toward. The last one, the round table at the back nearest the kitchen doors, where the place settings were for strangers, and the centerpiece was slightly smaller than the rest. She pulled out her own chair. She sat. She turned her water glass a quarter turn until the etched mark on its base squared to the table edge, and she folded her hands, and she waited. Major Braddock had already forgotten her face. He was 3 guests along, checking a name against a clipboard, smiling his practiced smile at a retired colonel and his wife, guiding them gently toward the front. A woman who had commanded soldiers in 3 theaters sat at the children's menu end of a charity gala, with her hands folded, saying nothing. And across the floor, the one man who knew exactly who she was kept his silence and watched her back, and hated every gold and glittering inch of the room that had just sent her to sit in the corner. The evening had not even begun. Lieutenant Grace Kellerman was 25 years old and holding a clipboard like it was a rifle. She stood at the front of the ballroom in her service uniform, hair in a regulation bun, seating chart clutched to her chest, and she was terrified of getting it wrong. This was her first foundation gala. Major Braddock had briefed her twice. Keep the head table clean, principals and guests of honor only. If someone drifts up who doesn't belong, you redirect them. Gently, always gently. But you redirect them. A 3-star general was coming tonight. The room had to be right. Front is your responsibility, Braddock had told her, straightening a place card by a millimeter. Anyone without a head table card, you walk them back. Don't argue. Don't explain. Smile and walk them back. We keep it clean. She had nodded. Keep it clean. She could do that. So when the woman in the slate gown had drifted up toward the front 20 minutes ago, Kellerman had been the one to flag the major, and the major had handled it, and the woman had gone to the back without a word, and Kellerman had felt the small, warm relief of a task done right. She did not think about the woman again. There were 400 things on her clipboard, and only one of her. The room filled. Wine poured. The volume climbed to that particular roar a room makes, when 300 people are all being slightly more charming than usual. Somewhere near the back, a caterer's tray of water glasses went down with a bright crash, and the roar dipped, and then somebody screamed. An older man at the second-to-last table had gone gray. He was a retired sergeant major, 71, 3 ribbons worth of a life on the lapel of his civilian suit, and he had one hand fisted in his shirt over his heart, and the other groping at the tablecloth, and he was sliding sideways out of his chair. The room did what rooms do. It froze in the useless humming way of 200 people who all assume someone else is about to move. One person moved. Colonel Hollis was out of her chair before the old man reached the floor. She did not run. Running is slow, running is panic. She crossed the 6 feet between tables and 3 flat steps and had him laid out on his back on the carpet with his collar open before the nearest waiter had set down his tray, 2 fingers to the side of his throat, her head tilted, listening, her eyes on the middle distance, counting. "He's breathing," she said. Her voice was flat and it carried without rising. Pulse 110 and thready. "He's conscious. Sir, look at me. Look right here." "Good." She did not look up. "There's an automated defibrillator on the wall by the service door. Red cabinet, left of the hinge. You, one hand, no wasted motion, at a frozen busser. Go, now. Bring the whole box." The busser went. A physician guest was already pushing through from 4 tables over, and Hollis gave him the man in 6 words. Cardiac, conscious, pulse 110, no meds known. And then she did the thing that Frank Delgado, watching from 12 feet away, found hardest of all to watch. She stepped back. She wiped her hands once on a cloth napkin, and she folded back into the crowd. And by the time the old sergeant major was sitting up, gray-faced and grateful with a color coming back into his cheeks, the woman who had run the whole thing was standing at the edge of the room again, as if she had never left it. Lieutenant Kellerman stood 10 feet away with her clipboard forgotten at her side, and stared. The woman had known where the defibrillator was. Nobody knew where the defibrillator was. Kellerman had been here 2 hours setting up, and she could not have told you which wall. The woman in the slate gown had known. Red cabinet, left of the hinge. The way you know a thing you have checked on your way into every unfamiliar room for 20 years. Major Braddock arrived late to the crisis on his own floor. He shook the physician's hand, thanked the hotel manager, smoothed the moment closed with the ease of long practice. Then his eye caught the woman in slate at the edge of things, and a piece of information clicked into a slot in his head, and the slot was the wrong one. "Good instincts," he said to her, warm, approving on his way past. "A lot of the spouses have medical backgrounds, nurses, a few doctors. It's wonderful, honestly. We're lucky to have you all." Colonel Hollis looked at him. She let the words stand where they fell. She did not tell him that the last time she had held 2 fingers to a man's carotid and counted, the man had not lived, and she had carried him 900 meters anyway. Wonderful, she agreed, quietly. She had saved a stranger's life between the salad course and the entree, and a major had called her a spouse with a nice hobby, and the only 2 people in the entire gold room who had seen what she actually was were a sergeant major who would not speak, and a lieutenant who did not yet have the words for why she could not stop staring. The woman at the spouse's table who saved Renata Hollis that night, saved her from the long, cold hour of sitting alone among strangers, was named Claire Bennett. Claire was 34, married to a captain currently 8 time zones away, and she had the particular warmth of a person who has spent enough deployments alone to know exactly how it feels to walk into a loud room and know no one. She watched the woman in slate settle back at their table with her hands folded, and she leaned over and introduced herself and refilled the woman's water glass without being asked. And just like that, Hollis was adopted. "Whose are you?" Claire asked, kindly, meaning whose guest, whose unit, whose husband. "I feel like I should know everyone at this table by now, and I've completely failed. I came for someone who isn't here," Hollis said. She did not say it heavily. She said it plainly, the truth folded small enough to fit through the question without breaking. But Claire Bennett heard the shape of it. Came for someone who isn't here, and her face softened into the particular tenderness that women in this world keep ready for each other, and she reached over and pressed Hollis's forearm once, and did not ask anything more. She thought she understood. She thought the woman was a widow. The misread deepened, and it deepened out of kindness, which made it harder to correct, and so Hollis did not correct it. The table's world closed around her, gentle and complete. A wife 2 seats down was tracking a permanent change of station move to a base Hollis had staged out of in another life. A younger woman was counting down a deployment on her fingers. 34 days, she said. 34 and a wake-up. There was school district talk, and there was the particular black humor of people who love someone the government keeps sending away. Hollis drank water, not wine. Her watch stayed turned inward on her wrist. She wore no rings. She listened far more than she spoke, and when she spoke, it was to ask the younger woman, gently, what her husband did with his hands when he came home wound too tight, which was exactly the right question. The question of someone who had come home wound too tight herself. She was good with them. That was the thing the room would never have believed. She was not enduring these women. She liked them. She would have taken a bullet for any one of them, and none of them would ever know. And while she talked with them, gently, in her low, careful voice, part of her never stopped working. She watched the head table fill without seeming to watch it. She watched the major move through the room with his clipboard and his smile. She watched a door that should have been locked stay propped for a busser, and made a note of it the way she made a note of everything, filed and dated and put away. It was not suspicion. It was not fear. It was simply the way she had learned to sit in any room in the world. Soft eyes, hands still, everything logged. A habit paid for in a currency she never discussed. The women at her table thought she was a good listener. She was. She was also the only person in 200 who could have told you, without turning her head, how many ways there were out of the room and which of them were blocked. Halfway through the entree, she rose. Quietly, folding her napkin, she stepped toward the front, not toward the head table, toward the wall. The memorial wall, glowing at the side of the dais, 24 photographs of young faces under soft light. She wanted to stand in front of one of them. That was all. That was the entire reason she had crossed 1,000 miles. Major Braddock intercepted her before she had taken 6 steps. "Ma'am." gentle, firm. A hand extended, not touching, guiding her arc back toward the tables. The memorial viewing is part of the principal's program. We open it to all our guests right after the general's remarks and the toast. It won't be long. If you'd like anything in the meantime, Lieutenant Kellerman up front can take care of you. The smile. Thank you for understanding. And Colonel Hollis, who could have said one sentence and stopped his heart, said nothing at all. She looked once at the wall, at one photograph in the second row, a young man with a crooked grin and a set of sergeant's stripes. And then she turned, and she went back to the spouse's table, and she sat down, and she squared her water glass to the edge. If you've ever been made small in a room that owed you everything, if you've ever swallowed it whole and kept your face still because making a scene would cost more than the wound, then you already understand this woman better than anyone at that gala did. Stay with her. The people who tell these stories are few, and this channel exists to tell them. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay to the end, because the room is about to learn exactly who had sat in the back. She had been redirected twice now, seated at the corner, gently mistaken for a widow, and she still had not been permitted to stand for 1 minute in front of the one photograph she had flown across the country to see. The trouble, from Major Braddock's side of it, was the list. He was not a cruel man. This is the part the room would get wrong later, in the retelling. They would make him a villain, because it made a cleaner story, and it was not true. Sean Braddock was 38 years old, a competent staff officer with a genuine reverence for the people this foundation existed to honor, and he ran the head table clean for the same reason he did everything clean, because he believed the dignity of the evening depended on order, and order was his to keep. So when Lieutenant Kellerman came to him quietly during the entree and said she could not find a Hollis anywhere on the seating manifest, Braddock did not hear the truth in it. He heard confirmation. The woman in slate was not on the list. He had walked her back twice on instinct, and now the paperwork agreed with his instinct, and a man rarely doubts a thing the paperwork agrees with. What the manifest did not show him, because event staff were never told, because that was the entire point, was that Colonel Hollis's name had been added 3 days earlier by the Foundation's own director, under a protective designation. No rank, no unit, no detail, at the specific request of a man who was at that moment 9 minutes out in a motorcade. Braddock did not know that. He could not have known that. He only knew that a woman he could not account for was drifting toward the front of a room he was responsible for on the night a 3-star came to speak. He made a decision he believed was correct. He found the hotel's security lead near the coat check and had a low, courteous word. And he found the event's protective NCO and had another. The instruction was quiet and it was polite, and it was, by the standards of his own certainty, kind. After the general's remarks and the memorial toast, would they discreetly escort the woman in the slate gown at the back table out to the lobby? No scene, no embarrassment. Just out gently. So the room was right for what came next. He was, he told himself, protecting a general's evening and a wall full of the honored dead from a stranger who had crashed them. Command Sergeant Major Delgado saw the conversation happen. He could not hear it, but he had spent 30 years reading exactly this kind of low, tilted head, hand near the mouth conversation, and he knew what it meant. He crossed the floor to Braddock in 6 strides. "Major," his voice was gravel and quiet. "That woman at the back, in the gray, you want to walk that back, right now, before it goes any further." Braddock did not even fully turn. He was scanning the head table, checking the fold of a napkin, his mind already 3 steps ahead into the timing of the general's arrival. "I've got it handled, Sergeant Major," he said, not unkindly, the way a busy man handles an interruption. "Everything's under control. Enjoy your evening." Delgado stood there a moment, His hands opened and closed at his sides. He could have ended it in one sentence. He could have said her name, her rank, her call sign, the things she did in the country neither of them named, and Braddock would have gone the color of ash, and the whole machine would have reversed on the spot. But Frank Delgado had served under Renata Hollis, and the first and hardest law of serving under her was that she did not permit anyone to pull her rank for her. Not once, not ever. She had chosen the back table. She had chosen the slate gown and the silence. And Delgado, who loved her the way soldiers love the officer who spent herself to bring them home, would not take that choice away from her in a hotel ballroom, even to spare her this. He stepped back. His jaw was iron. He went back to the bar and did not touch his glass. At the back table, Colonel Hollis had read the entire thing without hearing a word of it. The security lead's shift of weight. The glance her way and then away. The major's hand near his mouth. The protective NCO's small nod. She knew the choreography of being removed from a room. She had removed people from rooms herself. She knew she had perhaps 20 minutes before a courteous hand would appear at her shoulder, and a low voice would ask her to step this way, ma'am. She turned her water glass a quarter turn and squared it to the edge of the table. She decided, with the same economy she decided everything, to let it come. To say nothing. To let the evening arrive wherever it was going, and to trust that the 1 minute she came for, the 1 minute in front of one photograph, she would find a way to take before they walked her out. The room had quietly agreed she was a problem to be solved, and the one man alive who could have stopped it with a word had just been told, for the second time that night, to enjoy his evening. To understand why Frank Delgado stood at that bar with his hands opening and closing and did not touch his drink, you have to understand what he was carrying. 14 years ago, he had been a sergeant, young and certain, in a place the maps lied about. He does not talk about it. He has a wife who has learned not to ask about the 11 days in the spring of 2011 when her husband came home unable to sleep with his back to a door. He has a daughter who thinks her father is a quiet man who is good at fixing things. What none of them know, what he has never said out loud in 14 years, is that he is alive because of a captain with the call sign Kestrel who refused to leave a kill zone until every last body, breathing or not, was on a truck and moving. That captain was the woman in the slate gown at the back table, and watching a major wave her toward the corner and set a quiet plan to have her walked out of a room built, in part, for the men she carried. It was very nearly more than a disciplined man could stand. So he did the only thing his discipline and her code both allowed. He crossed the floor one more time, and he did not salute. She would have hated a salute in this room, in these clothes. And he pulled out the chair beside her and sat down heavy, an old man's sigh in it. And he said her name the only way that was permitted here. Low, private, almost tender. "Didn't think I'd see Kestrel at a dinner party," he said. Something moved at the very corner of Hollis's mouth. Not a smile, the distant cousin of one. "I'm off the clock, Frank," she said. "Let it be. They walked you to the back. They did. They're fixing to walk you out. I know." She said it the way you'd report the weather. Then, because it was Frank, because he was one of 11 men alive who had earned it, her voice gentled by exactly 1 degree. "How are the knees?" "Bad," he admitted. "Left one's a machine now. Titanium? A beat. Ellie made warrant. Chief warrant 2. Aviation. Rotary? Rotary. Good," Hollis said, and she meant it with a completeness that would have startled anyone who thought she was a widow with a medical hobby. "Tell her I said good." Up front, the MC tapped the microphone, and the room hushed, and a voice announced that the keynote was running a few minutes behind. The Lieutenant General's aircraft was on the ground. The motorcade was inbound. Please enjoy the coffee service. And the room murmured its patience, because the man they were waiting for was not just any 3-star. Lieutenant General Malcolm Pierce had founded this gala. 14 years ago, he had come home from a place he had no business surviving, and he had put his own name and his own money and the last of his political capital behind a foundation for the families of the men who did not come home from that theater, one of whom had a young widow and a young son and a folded flag, and a name that was, at this very moment, printed under a photograph in the second row of the glowing wall. Pierce had not missed a single one of these evenings in 14 years. He would not miss this one. Braddock, up front, confirmed the timing with Kellerman in a low voice, and confirmed one other thing besides. The woman in slate, out to the lobby during the toast, before the general took the podium. So the room was clean when he did. If you have ever known that the one person who would cross any distance for you was almost at the door, and known that someone else was about to make sure you were gone before they arrived, then lean in, because what happens next is the reason this channel exists. Subscribe to Honor Tales. You are 90 seconds from the moment the whole room turns. The general who owed her his life was 9 minutes from the door, and the major had just given the order to be sure she was gone before he walked through it. The night in the spring of 2011 did not have a name that anyone in that ballroom would ever be allowed to read. It began at dusk, a circulation convoy, a brigadier general, then 1 star on a battlefield tour he had insisted on making himself because he did not believe in commanding from a screen, took the wrong road home because the right road had washed out, and the wrong road had been waiting for exactly that. 2 vehicles went dead in the space of 4 seconds, a disabled lead and a burning tail, and the middle of the convoy, with the general in it, sat pinned in a dry wadi while fire came down from high ground on 2 sides. 900 meters away, a special forces detachment moving on an unrelated task heard the net light up and turned toward the sound of it, because that is what they were, and that is what she was. Captain Renata Hollis, 29 years old, call sign Kestrel, came up on the command net with a voice so flat it seemed to lower the temperature of the fight. Kestrel to all elements. General's party is pinned in the wadi, 2 vehicles down, fire from the north and the east ridge. We are not leaving him. We bound by 2s. On me. They went in on foot in the dark. There is no clean way to tell what the next 40 minutes were, and this is not the place to try, and the man who lived it will not describe it even to his wife. What matters is this. They reached the wadi. They got the general's party moving. And in the last 20 meters, where the ground was most open and the fire was heaviest, a sergeant first class named Milo Hartley put himself in the gap so that a 1-star general and 2 wounded aides could reach the vehicles alive. Milo Hartley was 26. He had a crooked grin. He had a young wife named for a season and a son who was learning to walk. He did not come back across those last 20 meters. The net went quiet where his voice had been, and Captain Hollis heard the quiet, and she made herself keep her own voice flat and moving, because the living needed her voice flat and moving, and she carried the grief the way she carried everything, folded small and put away to be opened for her, alone. In the back of a moving vehicle, a brigadier general with a field dressing on his arm and another man's blood on his uniform reached out and gripped the forearm of the captain who had come for him and asked her, over the engine noise, for her name. She gave him her call sign, not her name. Kestrel. He never forgot it. He never forgot the name either. The one he learned later. The one he would say into a silent ballroom 14 years on. And he never, not for one single day of the 14 years, forgot the young sergeant with the crooked grin who spent the last of himself in the last 20 meters so that a general could live to build a foundation and a wall and an evening full of gold light. There was a detail from that night that Colonel Hollis had never told anyone, Not in 14 years. Not in a single after-action review, because there was no line on any form for it. When she reached the general in the wadi, in the worst of it, with the fire coming down, and her own men bounding forward by twos, he had tried to give her an order. He had tried to tell her to leave the disabled tail vehicle and its crew and go. Save the ones who could still be saved, write the rest off. It was, by the cold arithmetic of that moment, the correct order. And a 29-year-old captain had looked a general in the eye in the middle of a kill zone and told him no. "We do not leave them. Get in the truck, sir." She had disobeyed a lawful order from a flag officer and gone back for the tail crew and pulled 2 more men out of a burning vehicle, and one of them was standing at a bar in a hotel ballroom 14 years later with a titanium knee and a daughter who flew helicopters. Pierce had never written her up for it. Pierce had built a foundation instead. 2 years later, the Special Operations Foundation held its first dinner. The first family it helped was a young widow, named for a season, and her son, who by then could run. Now, in the present, at a back table beside an old sergeant who was alive because of that night, Colonel Renata Hollis let herself have one honest thought. The only interior thing she would permit herself all evening. She had not come to be seen. She had not come to be seated, or thanked, or recognized. She had come to stand for 1 minute in front of Milo Hartley's photograph and tell him, silently, the way she did every year, that his boy could run now, and that she was sorry, and that she remembered. That was all. And a room built on his sacrifice had sent her to the back and was about to walk her out the door before she could reach him. The woman a major kept sending to the corner was the reason a general was alive to keynote the evening. She was the reason there was a foundation, and a wall, and a photograph in the second row she still had not been allowed to reach. The MC returned to the microphone as the coffee service cleared. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd please rise. Before our keynote, we observe our memorial toast to the fallen." The lights came down. The wall of photographs brightened under its own soft light. 24 young faces, suddenly the only bright thing in a darkened room. 200 people got to their feet with the scrape and rustle of a standing crowd and lifted their glasses, and a hush came down that was different from all the earlier hushes, heavier, older, the hush of people remembering. And in the dark, in the standing crowd, Colonel Hollis stepped out of her row and moved toward the wall, not toward the head table, toward the second row of photographs, toward the young man with the crooked grin. This was her minute. The room was dark and standing and looking at the wall, and she would take the 1 minute she came for now, while every eye was already where hers had been all night. Major Braddock saw her move, and something in him, the timing, the plan, the clean room, the general at the door, tightened into alarm, and he crossed to her fast, and he made the single worst decision of his evening. He took her by the elbow, not hard, but his hand closed on her arm and he turned her, physically turned her, away from the wall and back toward the tables, and his voice, meaning to be low, came out just loud enough to reach the 3 nearest tables in the silence of the toast. Ma'am, not during the toast. Guests remain at their tables. Please." A tug, gentle and absolute. "Please, ma'am, come with me." Heads turned. Claire Bennett, 2 tables away, came half out of her chair with her hand to her mouth, stricken for her new friend. Near the doors, Lieutenant Kellerman went cold all over, and for the first time all night a crack ran through her certainty, because she was looking at the woman's face, and the woman's face was not the face of someone who had wandered somewhere she didn't belong. Colonel Hollis let herself be turned. She let a major put a hand on her arm and steer her in a darkened room, in front of a wall of the honored dead, away from the one grave that had brought her there. She did not pull free. She did not raise her voice. She turned her head, and looked at Sean Braddock, and her face was not angry, and it was not afraid, and slowly, for the first time that entire evening, she smiled at him. It was a small smile. It was almost kind. It was the exact smile that 11 men still living would have recognized instantly as the most dangerous thing in any room she had ever stood in. "You're doing your job," she said softly. And behind Major Braddock, unseen by him, at the far end of the darkened ballroom, the tall doors opened. A protective detail came through first, quiet men who moved the way she moved, then an aide. And the air of the room changed, that animal change a crowd feels before it has words for it. And 200 standing people began, in a slow ripple from the back of the room forward, to understand that someone had arrived, and to turn. A major had just turned a colonel back toward the cheap seats with a hand on her elbow, in front of 200 people. And behind him, the doors had opened, and the room was beginning, row by row, to come to attention on its own. Lieutenant General Malcolm Pierce came through the doors without ceremony. He was 58 years old, silver at the temples, 3 stars on each shoulder, and he lifted one hand at the standing, turning room in the universal gesture of a senior officer telling everyone to sit down, please, as you were. It was a gesture the room had seen him make for 14 years. Ordinarily it worked. It did not work because the general was not looking at the room. He was not looking at the head table with its careful cards and its empty chair of honor. He had come through the doors, and his eyes had gone straight over the heads of the principals and the donors and the brass, straight to the back and the dark, scanning, hunting, until they stopped. They stopped on a woman in a slate gown with a major's hand on her elbow. Something in the general's face broke open. 14 years of a particular held breath went out of him all at once, and he lowered the hand he had raised, and he started to walk. He walked the length of the ballroom, past the head table, past the reserved cards with the important names, past the donors who half lifted their hands to greet him and were not seen, past Major Braddock, who was still half turned with his hand near the woman's arm, and whose face was just beginning to register that the 3-star general was not stopping, was not slowing, was walking directly at the back corner of the room where he had put the problem in the slate gown. 58 years old, 3 stars on his shoulder, and he crossed 100 feet of ballroom like a man walking toward the one grave that ever mattered. He stopped in front of her. The whole room was watching now, silent, standing, glasses still half raised from a toast. No one had finished. Major Braddock's hand had fallen away from her elbow. "Colonel Hollis," said Lieutenant General Pierce, and his voice was not a general's voice. It cracked clean down the middle on the second word. "I have been trying to seat you next to me for 14 years, and every single year you keep sitting in the back." The word went through Major Sean Braddock like cold water. "Colonel." His face began to move through its stations, and the whole front of the room watched it happen. First confusion. A mistake, surely. The general had mistaken her for someone. There was no colonel at the back table. He had the manifest. He had checked the manifest. Then disbelief, as the general took both of the woman's hands in both of his. The woman Braddock had called a spouse. The woman he had told to go share pie recipes. The woman he had steered to the corner twice and moved to have walked out the door. Then recognition, arriving in a sick cascade. The name added late under a protective flag. No rank, no unit. The way she had known where the defibrillator was. The flat voice giving orders on the floor. The sergeant major who had crossed the room twice to tell him to walk it back and been told to enjoy his evening. And finally, last of all, horror, pure and total and physical, as Sean Braddock remembered the feeling of his own hand closing on this woman's arm 90 seconds ago, in the dark, in front of 200 people, turning her away from the wall. Lieutenant General Pierce did not look at the Major. He did not have to. He put Colonel Hollis's hand in the crook of his own arm, and he turned, and he walked her the length of the ballroom himself, back toward the head table, through a standing room that parted in front of them without being asked. At the head table, he reached down and moved a place card with the wrong name on it gently aside, and he seated Colonel Renata Hollis in the chair at his own right hand. Then he turned to the room, and without a microphone, in a voice pitched to carry to the back where she had been sitting all night, he said the only thing he was going to say. For those of you who don't know her, and it seems most of you don't, this is the officer who carried me out of a place I had no business surviving. There is a wall in this room tonight because of a night she does not talk about. There are families whole tonight because of her. She will not want me to say one word more than that. He paused, and his jaw worked, and he got the rest of it out level. So I won't. Please, finish the toast. To the fallen? To the fallen, the room answered, ragged and low. There was no formation. There was no shouted call sign, no wall of snapping salutes. There was only a 3-star general seating a woman in a slate gown at his right hand, and a room full of people quietly rearranging everything they thought they had understood. And at the bar, at long last, Command Sergeant Major Frank Delgado let himself smile. And at the back of the room, alone, Major Sean Braddock stood beside an empty chair that no longer had anyone to put in it, and held on to the back of it because his legs did not entirely feel like his own. The rest of the dinner passed the way the surface of deep water passes, calm on top, everything moving underneath. Sean Braddock got through it. He did his job, because doing his job was the only structure holding him upright. He cued the closing remarks. He thanked the caterers. He stood at the doors as the guests filtered out into the night. And when the ballroom had mostly emptied, he did the hardest thing he had done in years. He walked to the head table, and he stood in front of Colonel Hollis, and he waited to be looked at. She looked at him. She let him stand there a moment in it, which he understood he had earned. "Colonel," he said. His voice was not steady. There isn't anything I can say that isn't an excuse. I saw a woman alone in a gown, and I decided I knew what that meant, and I was wrong in every way a man can be wrong. I had you moved to be walked out of this room. I put my hand on you." He stopped, started again. "Whatever this costs me, it should cost me. I won't fight it." He believed he knew what it would cost him. He believed a complaint was coming, or a relief, or a phone call that would quietly end the part of his career he cared about most. And then he learned the thing that emptied his stomach entirely, because Lieutenant General Pierce, gathering his coat nearby, said it without any weight at all, as a simple fact between colleagues. "Sean, you've met your new task force commander, I trust. Colonel Hollis takes command Monday morning." A small, dry beat. "You'll be reporting to her." Braddock closed his eyes. He had steered the woman he would answer to, on Monday, to the back of a room. He had put his hand on her arm. He waited for the axe, and he had never in his life wanted anything less and expected anything more. Colonel Hollis rose. She stepped around the table, and she took Major Braddock a little apart from the others, near the glowing wall. And when she spoke, her voice was low and clipped, and it did not have a single wasted word in it. "I'm not going to end you," she said. He looked up. "Ending you is easy," she went on. "It's the lazy thing. It's what everyone in that room thinks I should do. And it would take me one email, and it would teach you nothing except to be more careful about who you humiliate." Her eyes held his, flat and level, and without cruelty. "You're not stupid, Major. You're not even unkind. You saw a gown and you stopped looking. That's the whole failure. You decided you already knew, and you stopped looking. And a man who stops looking will one day wave off the exact person who most needed to be let through the door. A pause. I have watched that mistake get people killed, not embarrassed. Killed. Braddock said nothing. There was nothing to say that would be worth more than his silence. Monday you work for me, Colonel Hollis said, and I am going to teach you to look longer. That's the price. Not your career, your habit. You're going to become the officer who checks twice, who assumes the quiet one in the corner might be the most dangerous person in the building, who lets the stranger reach the wall. Do that, and in a year no one will remember tonight. Fail at it, and I won't need to end you. You'll do it yourself. She let a half-second pass. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am, Braddock said. And for the first time all night, he meant the ma'am with everything he had. Good. And that was all. No axe. A harder thing than an axe, and a fairer one. She turned and walked away from him without another word, and Sean Braddock stood there a long moment in the empty room and understood that he had just been given something he did not deserve, and that the rest of his career would be the work of earning it. It was the single most important conversation of his professional life, and it had lasted under 2 minutes, and no one else had heard a word of it. Lieutenant Kellerman was waiting a few feet off, twisting her hands, and when Hollis turned to go, the young lieutenant stepped forward before she could lose her nerve. Ma'am, I flagged you, at the start. To the major. I'm the reason I saw you go up front and I flagged you, and I never once wondered if I might be wrong. Her chin was up, which took something. I should have said something, when it kept happening. I felt it was wrong, and I didn't say anything, and I'm sorry. Colonel Hollis studied her for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, her face warmed by that same single degree it had warmed for Delgado. You felt it was wrong, she said. That's the part that matters. Most people never feel it at all. She held the young officer's eyes. The feeling is cheap, Lieutenant. Everyone gets the feeling. The whole job, the entire job, is the 10 seconds after the feeling, when you decide whether you're going to open your mouth or keep the room comfortable. Next time, open your mouth. That's it. That's the whole lesson. You'll be a fine officer if you learn it now, instead of at 40. Kellerman swallowed hard and nodded, and something in her stood a half-inch taller, and she would remember those 2 sentences for the rest of a long career. Here at the end, one last word, because if this story reached something in you, the courage of a woman who answered contempt with dignity and answered a wrong with a lesson instead of a firing, then that is exactly the story this channel exists to tell. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay to the very end, because the last minute of this night belongs to no general and no major. It belongs to a name on a wall. The room had thinned to almost nothing. The caterers were folding the white cloths. The chandeliers had come up to their brighter working light, and the gold had gone ordinary, and the gala was becoming, again, just a hotel ballroom. Lieutenant General Pierce walked Colonel Hollis to the memorial wall himself, and then, understanding exactly what she needed, he stepped back, 3 paces, 4, and gave her the wall and the quiet and the minute. She stood in front of the second row. She stood in front of a photograph of a young man with a crooked grin and a set of sergeant's stripes. Sergeant First Class Milo Hartley, 26 years old forever. And she did not speak, and she did not cry, and she did not move for 1 full minute. Her hand came up and lay flat over her own sternum. Whatever she said to him, she said, without any sound at all. The same thing she said every year, that his boy could run now, that his boy could run, that she remembered, that she was sorry, that she would carry it the rest of her life the way she had carried him the last of those 20 meters, all the way to the truck. A few feet back, Command Sergeant Major Frank Delgado stood at a respectful distance, with his hands folded in front of him, and he did not intrude, and his eyes were bright, and he let her have it. He had stood at this wall every year for 14 years, and every year he had watched her do this, from a distance, without ever letting her know he had seen, because he understood that grief this private was not a thing you witnessed out loud. Tonight was the first year she knew he was there. Neither of them said anything about it. There was nothing that needed saying between two people who had carried the same man across the same 20 meters, and only one of whom got to grow old. Somewhere in the emptying room, Claire Bennett was being told, quietly, by another wife, who the woman in the slate gown had actually been, and Claire would stand very still for a moment, and then she would think about the sentence the woman had given her at the table. I came for someone who isn't here, and she would understand it, finally, all the way down, and she would not be able to speak for a little while. Then Colonel Hollis squared her shoulders. She turned. She thanked Lieutenant General Pierce quietly. No speech, no ceremony, just a hand briefly gripped and a nod that held 14 years in it. And she walked back down the length of the empty ballroom, past the head table where she had finally, briefly sat, past the back table where she had spent the night, and out through the lobby. She stepped through the hotel doors into a cold, clear night. No speech behind her, no salute, no phone in her hand. Nothing left to prove to anyone, because the only people whose recognition had ever mattered, a general who owed her his life, a sergeant who was alive because of her, a young sergeant on a wall who could not answer, had never for one instant needed convincing. She had come 1,000 miles to stand for 1 minute in front of one photograph. She had let a room decide she was no one. And she walked out into the dark, having proven absolutely nothing to anybody, and carrying, as she always did, everything. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.